Are you an ambitious leader ready to break through limiting beliefs, align with your purpose, and thrive in your career without sacrificing your well being or postponing your true desires? I'm Diana Ordonez, certified high performance coach and your host. Each week, we'll dive into actionable insights and research based strategies to help you unlock clarity, build unshakable confidence, and take courageous action toward a life of impact and fulfillment. If you're ready to overcome fear, embrace growth, and step boldly into your next level, you're in the right place. Let's create a life filled with courage and purpose together. Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Courage and Purpose. Today, we are meeting with Sarah DelVecchio, who I met on my journey. She is a holistic health practitioner that specializes in trauma. And I found her in a time in my life where I really didn't understand why I had already done so much of the mind work that I understood to be so important in changing your mindset and your beliefs and changing your life. And so Sarah was really a godsend for me. And today we're actually recording on Juan's birthday in honor of him, because I think it's so important that people get exposed to the help that's out there for them when they're going through things that have been very traumatic, or when they're trying to process the loss of someone, or even in my case, it brought up many old wounds from my childhood that I wasn't even aware of. And so I think it's a very important conversation to have. I'm honored to be having it on Juan's birthday. It almost didn't happen that way, so I think it's divine intervention. And so, Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about, what you do with people, how they find you, like how they come to know that they need additional support, how you support them, and what it is that makes what you do so different from maybe traditional therapy, or like the mind work that we typically find ourselves doing when we're in personal development work, right?
Okay, yeah. So first, thanks for having me. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate you having me here on such a vulnerable day. And I think that this is really great. And so I look forward to our conversation. And so, yeah, I started out traditionally as a therapist in the Western world, and so I am a licensed clinician. But over the last couple of years, I started to recognize that there was a little bit of like limitation within that space, um, particularly around the trauma piece and understanding how we can get deeper into our bodies. And so through kind of my like own personal experiences and then also professionally in the work that I was doing with clients, I started to really see more and more that trauma was kind of the underlying factor of the majority of these mental health issues that people were experiencing. And then in my case, my personal experience, physical issues as well. And so I started to really make that link between the physical and the mental, um, and then found trauma as the key there, the bridge between those two. So yeah, so what I do now is really specialize in helping people heal from that complex trauma that they've maybe been experiencing throughout their lives, but really haven't been aware of it as being as impactful as it maybe has been.
Yeah, and I think that's so powerful, because especially because when you talk about, the Western world, and one of the things about that resonates with me is that, first of all, we're not even taught how to process our emotions. Most of us are being raised by, emotionally immature parents, because even, in the Western world, what is actually healthy for us to do when we're experiencing intense emotion is actually frowned upon, and we're told not to do it. And people are shamed for those things, or what have you. And so it's the inability to learn these things that are naturally kind of part of the process, is what I learned from you. And then second is just to learn in society to minimize some of the things that we experienced in childhood, which leads us to believe that there is nothing to address about these experiences, right? So,
Hmm.
um, m- maybe talk a little bit about how this complex trauma sometimes manifests, because I think a lot of people don't think that they have, stuck emotions or that they even have any trauma.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of times people, when they hear trauma, they think of something very large, that it has to be some kind of very big event, or um, something really major that has occurred. And so we do a lot of minimizing of little traumas that occur across our lifespan. And so trauma, okay, so I think we do a lot of kind of minimizing of it, like experiences that really do hold impact. And so trauma doesn't necessarily have to be just this large event, but really it's any event or any experiences that overwhelm our capacity to function, right? That overwhelm our emotional, physical, psychological well-being. And that can occur over the course of lots of little things that happen, right? And so not having emotional support, or being bullied, or um, being neglected, or growing up in a family where emotions weren't discussed, or conflict resolution didn't occur. So we often kind of really minimize these experiences as having any kind of impact on our like adult present day functioning. And a lot of times what we see instead, or what we like what we're presenting with, we kind of assume are part of our personality. Oftentimes there's these personality traits that we kind of hold that really show up as like perfectionism, or working too much, or overachieving, hyper independence. Yes, these kind of things that we assume are parts of who we are, but really are these um, experiences, or these kind of things that developed through these experiences as a kid.
Yeah, I remember getting to a point in that process where I started to question like everything about my personality, like what part is actually me versus these coping mechanisms that I've like just generated as a way of protecting myself, right?
Yes.
So maybe talk a little bit about how do you differentiate between the two?
Yeah. So, okay. So a lot of times, like people will come in because they're experiencing problems, right? Like either problems in a relationship, or they're having problems functioning on a day to day, like due to anxiety or depression. Right. And so you're seeing these kind of main symptoms that are coming in. And so when you come in to explore that space, when you slow down to wonder why and where these things are coming from, a lot of times what we'll find is that it's really these like older childhood parts that are holding emotions that had never been seen, or never been processed, or never been really ever able to be expressed a lot of times. And so through the exploration of those kind of patterns that you're experiencing, or symptoms that you're experiencing, and we get a little bit deeper, we often will find that it's really these situations that occurred when you were younger, and these parts that are being kind of these unseen parts of you that are trying to be heard and seen.
And I hear you talking, IFS parts lingo, right? And I know for me, I had never heard of IFS or internal family systems, or even um, thought of my self having multiple parts until we started doing that work. So maybe expand a little bit about that, because you said when we go deeper, and I know IFS is a big part of, going deeper. Um, and a lot of people are in therapy, and I find that when they are in, and this happened to me too, when they are in traditional therapy, they're not necessarily going deeper, but they are talking a lot about their problems kind of on a superficial level. And so it seems like you can be just having this almost like the same session over and over and over, but not getting anywhere. And so talk about what going deeper actually like means and how maybe parts work is a part of that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I guess that the trauma, right, is living in the subconscious, right? And so these are these kind of older experiences and older emotions that are living beneath the surface, right?
Mhm.
And so we are going through our day to day and talking most of the time from our conscious. So we're talking from our surface level, and we're really viewing things from that space, right? Like perception wise, we're visibly viewing things from that space. And so we do when we're talking about it, we're only talking about what we can access on a surface level, right? And so when we talk about wanting and needing to go deeper, it's that we need to find something that's going to bypass the conscious to get into the subconscious and into the underground, the area that is really holding all of these things that we've pushed down. I mean, if you think about it like that, like a house analogy, right? It's like we're living on the first floor, and all these experiences and emotions that we've pushed down are living in the basement, right? Like we've pushed them away and they couldn't go anywhere. So they're still in there. We just are not really able to see them visibly, right? Or consciously. So when we talk about going deeper, we want to get into the spaces that are holding the unconscious stuff, the repressed stuff. And so the reason it's hard to do that while we're talking is because we have this thing called the ego. And everybody's got the ego. It's a protective factor, right? And it comes in, and the ego keeps us on our conscious to keep us protected from what is unconscious, right? Because it knows that what's down there is hard and is painful and is scary sometimes and holds things that have been really for many years deemed like unacceptable for whatever reason, right? And so the ego is going to do everything it can to keep us from getting there, and it really thinks it's protecting us. Um, but at the same time, it, as you're saying and recognizing, it's also keeping us stuck, right? It's keeping us in the same patterns. And so while the ego it thinks it's protecting us because it's doing what it knows, it's actually now harming us because it's keeping us from moving forward. Um, so the IFS work, what it starts to do is recognize that inside of us are some parts that we have had to hide away throughout
Mhm.
the course of our life for whatever kinds of reasons. And when we start to listen and we quiet down, we find these parts and they start to give us their messages. And most of the time, these parts are holding the emotion that we're experiencing, the anxiety, the worry, the depression, stories that we chose to forget or didn't even or consciously didn't know we were repressing, right?
Mhm.
Um, so what we do is you go inside and you kind of really find these parts, and we just allow the part to talk, right? And so what we do is we help our thinking part and our conscious part, our ego part, step aside and be quiet for a little bit of time while our older parts can surface and give us some of that, give us some of the emotion that they want us to hear and some of the knowledge that they have that they need us to know.
So I'm sure people at home are wondering, well, how does that happen? Like, how do you do that? I know for me, the first time we talked about this, I'm like, I don't even know. I remember the first time you asked me, what are you feeling? I also said, I don't even know what I feel. Like, what do you feel in your body? I had no idea. And so I'm wondering, like, how do you get access to those parts? Because when I started to learn about the subconscious, I found things like hypnotherapy or deep meditative work with, I'm trying to think now, his work. Oh my goodness. Maybe you can help me with this. It's,
Oh,
the biggest,
Joe Dispenza? Or, yeah.
yes, like Joe Dispenza's work, right? Where they're talking about oh, it's because you're not getting into the subconscious, and they really promote this like meditative state and hypnosis. And yet I found that it wasn't until we started doing the work on the actual emotion, not just the belief, that
Mhm.
things started to progress. So maybe talk about that. Like, how do you get, um, access to that subconscious part? How do you relax the conscious part? Why didn't these, subconscious ways of work of trying to address my subconscious belief maybe not work for me or might not be working for some other people? And what's the tie back to emotions in that?
Yes. Okay. So the trauma ultimately, right? Fundamentally, trauma disrupts our safety, right? It disrupts our fundamental internal safety system, is what trauma does, right? And so what happens then is it starts to become unsafe inside of us to feel our feelings because they hold danger ultimately, right? Because our response, like our nervous system's job, right, is to respond to danger. And if any kind of emotional expression holds any association as being a threat of some sort, whether that be like embarrassment or anger or loss, right, or disconnection, right? Like if expressing our feelings means somebody might leave us, that's going to be considered a threat in our body, right? And so any perceived threat that our body has is going to activate the nervous system, right? To go into like safety mode. So when we're talking about the like how do you come into to knowing, right? The initial question that you asked was,
So yeah, so it was, I guess you were starting to talk about how we develop these subconscious beliefs and then we try these methods for getting to our subconscious, but they may or may not work for you if you haven't actually gotten a chance to process out the emotion. And like what role does emotion processing your emotions play in actually wiring our subconscious beliefs, I guess, and why these
yeah.
other methods might not be this something that works for someone with trauma, right?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So, so yeah, the emotion becomes unsafe in our system, right? And so, like when you're saying why is it hard to kind of get to reprogramming the belief system is because the belief systems are feeling, or the emotion that's held in there is feeling unsafe, right? And so our automatic like safety mechanism goes on, right? And so what we have to do is learn how to recognize when our body's giving signals to activate the nervous system so that we can learn to slow down that activation or deactivate the nervous system and stay out of fight or flight to be able to then have a conscious awareness of what's happening in our subconscious, right? But what's happening right before we have the awareness of what's going on in our subconscious is it's just automatic responses, safety responses. And so your nervous system is automatically clicking on, and it's not then allowing you access to your subconscious to see what's in there. And so what we want to do is learn how to really regulate the nervous system, or identify when the nervous system is starting to activate and move out of a different zone, if you will, or a different stage of regulation.
Right. So maybe talk a little bit about how do people know that their nervous system is being activated so that they can try to regulate their nervous system. Even just, I didn't even understand like what role the nervous system played in my, you know, belief system in the way I was perceiving things or in the way that I was responding to things. Um, like I think I always thought that I was responding from a rational, logical place, not even recognizing that I had these coping mechanisms. And I see it with my clients all the time, right? Like catastrophizing or, going to the worst case scenario, um, pushing someone away, um, just shutting down. Um, like talk about how do you first explain the nervous system, I think would be helpful to people that haven't heard about that
Mm-hmm.
aspect of our emotions and how they work and why it's actually getting in our way sometimes
Mm-hmm.
when we're done a lot of personal development work. And then, you know, moving through that to like understanding emotion, processing emotion, and how that impacts our ability to have more rational, have more, I hate to say control because that's probably not what you want to say, but it's like to feel more empowered, I guess, rather than a victim of what's happening in our
Mhm.
bodies and minds.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, it is in a sense to have more. I hear what you're saying about not adding the word control to control, like, but ultimately, right? It's like you do want to be in the driver's seat. So it's like it's helping you to be the one who's driving internally what's happening and not what's internally happening driving you, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, so with the nervous system, when we don't do a lot of talking about our nervous system. Um, but our nervous system, and then also I think we have this idea that right now there's a lot of talk about nervous system regulation as being a big buzzword out there. And I think we have a belief system that regulation kind of means that we're supposed to be regulated all the time, and like we're supposed to be calm and
Mhm.
okay and not react and all of this stuff. And like regulated looks like this, right? But really, our nervous system is our vagus nerve goes from our brain straight down, right, and through our gut, and so it's up and down, right? And so ultimately, we're going up and down all day long, every day. And so regulated is actually more like this and not like this, right? And so what we what we're noticing in our body is like when we are at a calm state, like when things are feeling open, when our body is feeling open, when we're feeling receptive to stuff, when our mind is feeling clear, we're in this kind of ventral state, right? Kind of a flow state, and people refer to it as where we just kind of are, right? And then things happen. Then our body reacts to sensory experiences and to external experiences. And so something might happen that sparks something inside that maybe is like, someone drops a pen in front of you and I get a little like tingle in my stomach that is telling me, look up, like see what happened, right? And so I'll look up and see it's a pen and I can say, oh, it's just a pen dropped, and I can help my body now come down, right? But if I don't have the control over my nervous system and somebody drops a pen and it makes a noise and my nervous system um, is sensitive due to having a lot of old repressed emotion, right? Or not ever having been able to attune to emotion, that drop of the pen might send my nervous system up into fight or flight because that noise might activate something that says you're unsafe. And if I don't have the awareness of my nervous system, I can't look inside and say, wait a minute, it was just a pen. We are safe right now. Instead, my body is going to take that pen as, okay, it was, a bomb dropping, and I might jump up or get very startled, right? And that's your nervous system going right up into fight or flight mode. And
Yeah.
so what we want to do is build that awareness of what's happening and what the signals are inside our body so that we can help to um, be able to move through those different states throughout the day.
Yeah. And so the way I see this in like a very like practical sense that people aren't necessarily um, thinking about is like even in relationships with our partners or in work relationships when someone says something disrespectful or raises their voice at us or says something that we perceive as controlling or says something that we perceive as rejection. And so like it's not necessarily like something physical that happens like
Mm-hmm.
a bus coming at you. That I think that awareness of the nervous system, not understanding um that it's safe
Mm-hmm.
in a situation like that, and then how that response happens right away, especially in someone that maybe considers themselves like an overthinker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think one of the things that you always is like slow down,
Yeah.
right? Like that's like the first sign is like my thoughts are coming really fast
Hmm.
and can't seem to slow it down. And so talk about that experience, right? Like something happens and our nervous system suddenly is um, overactive, and now we don't recognize that that's what's happening, and what happens next, and what could we do to help ourselves in those moments.
Yeah, yeah. So it's I think you're right. Like the very first step is slowing down, right? It really is in we have to slow down enough to have the awareness that we're even having internal reactions and sensations, right? And so right now, like a lot of times people are moving way too fast and moving through everything very quickly and not connecting to what's happening on the internal experience, right? So slowing down is actually the very first step, and it really has to be the first step, is to slow down enough to say like what is going on, to really just raise that awareness of what's happening inside my body. And that is the first step. It's like that basic is literally just saying like what am I feeling in my body? Right? Like is it hot? Is it cold? Is it tingly? Is it tense? Is it open? Right? Just really being that basic and like what's happening, but doing that without the judgment. Okay, and so we add our a lot of times we add the judgment in because we don't want these reactions to be happening, and so we add in this judgment of like, why is this happening? Why is my body doing this? I don't like this. Go away. This feeling doesn't feel good, right? And so we just try and push them away, and you know, I don't know, we just try and get rid of it, right?
Hmm.
But what we really want to do is get curious about it and understand it without judging it, okay? And really just saying like, this is here. I just notice it, just acknowledge it, just understand it, and that's the first that's the first step is to knowing that you're having reactions in your body, and that can actually take some time. And so like the next step is having patience with yourself, because a lot of times we will say, I mean, I hear this so often, I've tried these things and they're not working, right? And it's like, yeah, it's not working necessarily in this moment yet, but you have to keep going, right? Because um you're teaching your body safety very slowly. So like if we need to slowly build that safety for your body to even be okay with having the awareness, because even the awareness can feel scary to your body, right? Because it's like the closer we get to recognition, then the closer we get to seeing it, and that becomes the threat inside our system.
Right, right. And so when you talk about like the awareness and then naming it, so say you get that far, what do you do next with that information? Like, how does the body connect to like then your actions, like what you feel in your body, and then how do you start to um, influence the actions that you want to take?
Okay, so by listening, yeah, by listening to the emotions. Okay, so what we have right now is this idea that our emotions are like good or bad. We kind of have this like um perception of feelings and emotions in these categories of being healthy or unhealthy or helpful or not helpful, right? But but all of our emotions are healthy and all of our emotions are helpful and all of our emotions are here with the message. So the key, like what we want to do, okay, when we can identify that we have something in our system, right? So okay, so like there's my stomach is feeling really tight, and so I might just slow down, put my hands on my stomach, and listen, and really listen to what's in there. And while you're doing that, what we might experience is emotions start to rise. You might start feeling tears. Your stomach might start getting tighter. It might do the opposite, it might get looser. You might start having memories of all of the times that you felt angry, all the times you felt sad, all the times you felt right. And so that melting in to that sensation, or that melting into the feeling of just acknowledging it and accepting it, of going into it, is going to release. right? And it's hard to say exactly how it will release because that's going to be a very personal experience for everybody. And it'll be a personal experience for each time you go to release, right? And so each time you go to do something or each time you notice a reaction, it might not be similar or the same. It might be, but it could be very different as well. And so it's allowing yourself to know that whatever is coming up is okay. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's not good, it's not bad. It's okay, right? And to just listen to it and to allow it to release. So when the emotion does start to come, let it come, right? Or when the stories and the memories start to come, letting them know it's okay. Like it's all right that I see you. And rather than saying to yourself, oh no, I don't want to see that, go away. I'm trying to not remember that, go away. I'm over that. We already went past that, right? It's coming back up for a reason, right? And so if it's coming back up, we just want to let it come and be seen and go. And a lot of times we do hang on to it out of the judgment of this should be over already because we have this notion that emotions, like we should not have our emotions, that we shouldn't be feeling this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so talk a little bit about what happens when you don't process out your emotions in this way.
Yeah, so our emotions get stuck in our body then, right? And this is where the complex like childhood trauma builds, is that when you have these series of emotions and experiences throughout your life that were never able to be acknowledged, or validated or seen or even in a lot of times even expressed. A lot of times people are holding things that they have never said out loud ever, right? And so when these feelings and this energy, these emotions, right? So emotions are energy, energy in motion. And so when the energy of those emotions is not able to be released or to be expressed or to be moved, it gets stuck into our fascia and into our tissue. And it goes into our body and we hold that. And then that starts to create toxic cells, right? It starts to turn our healthy cells toxic because we have this energy that is covering our healthy cells, and the energy is not healthy energy, right? It is stagnant, sad emotion, old emotion that needs to be seen. And so it starts to turn our cells toxic, and then we start to get physical problems as well. And so a lot of times we get a lot of chronic health issues, autoimmune disease, cancer. All of these things are the foundation of emotional repressed memories that are stuck in our body.
Yeah. Yeah. I know like Gabor Mate's work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It like he, as a medical doctor, saw so often that a lot of the medical conditions that are present are actually because we suppress all this emotion. And so I like that could be overwhelming for some people to hear, right? Because they've been on medication for a long time for this um, health problem. And I'm just wondering, uh,
Mm-hmm.
this I know I'm like springing this on you, but what is it about the medical world where's the gap in the way we're treating people that are presenting these medical like manifestations of not being able to address this unprocessed trauma or unprocessed emotions in our bodies.
Where is the gap in the medical world? Is that
Yeah, like where's the
yeah.
gap? Like, why is it that there's so much medicine and yet it seems that a lot of our society is built on living a life that keeps our nervous system kind of in this dysregulated state and does not support um, slowing down and processing our emotions and expressing our emotions in ways that allow us to release them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's a great question that I think a lot of people right now are throwing around in their minds, right? And I don't have necessarily the answer. But what I see, like from my perspective and my opinion, is like this, there's a larger, there's a larger financial reason that keeps our medical industry from acknowledging a lot of the newer science and the newer information that we have. And I don't know how we're bridging that gap, right? Because it's not that the science isn't out there. It's not that the medical research isn't out there. It's not that we don't have this evidence based, because everybody loves that it to be scientifically evidence based. It's not that we don't have that, and a lot of people are still under the belief that we don't have that, and that this is all like woo woo information that's still out there. But we have all of that, and I can't really give you the reason why our industries are deciding to keep that quiet, or deciding to
Mhm.
not infiltrate that into our system, right? Except for, from what my perspective I see, is a much bigger financial gain on their behalf. And so I don't, it's the science is there, the research is here, the understanding is here, the lived experience is here, right? We have a entirely very large population of people with chronic illness that just continues to rise, right? That number just continues to rise. And so if our medical practices are getting better, then why is the average age of death going down? And why is the average chronic illness going up, right? And so I don't have the answer. And this is really part of the reason why I came out of that Western medical perspective of therapy, is because it felt as though there was a real big purposeful reason to not integrate information, and that was feeling very harmful actually from my perspective. And then and so I had to step out of that space, right? And so yeah, I don't really know the answer to that entirely, except that if you take it upon yourself to do a lot of this research, you'll find very good scientifically backed research on the impact of emotions and our physical health, and it's there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I I guess two things come up for me. When you talk about money, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, slowing down and taking the time to do this work and allowing people to do that, it also takes an impact on, how much time are people working towards making big, corporations money, right? Like taking
Mhm.
the time to slow down and, you know, have conversations about people's feelings at the workplace, even. Even just healing my own stuff, like I've seen that, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. So we can't, if a company is going to say, like, we can't afford you to be depressed, we can't pay you when you're not performing in this way. Here's some, medicine to quickly like get you working again. I can see how that seems appealing to, a society that's driven on just producing more and more.
Yeah.
Um, and and honestly, not just from that perspective, even from a like a personal perspective, right? If you're trying to keep up with all of that and you are taking a long time to come out of it, especially in our society where everything is like immediate gratification and quick results. And, you know, I hate to like, I don't want to sound discouraging when I say this, but it does take time and it is a painful process
Mhm.
to to go through in order to be on the other side of where maybe it's perceived that, well, on the other side of taking a medicine that has been prescribed to me, like they might perceive it's the same result faster without the long grueling process. So what do you
Mhm.
say kind of to those things? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a belief system shift. I think we have to, like, ultimately as a whole, collectively, we have to really shift the paradigm and understanding of wellness and health and emotions and productivity and what that means, right? And so there's this idea, like you said, that like we're going to be more productive or make more money if we work longer and harder. But the reality is that actually is not even true either, right? Like we have science and we have research that proves that that's not true. That's not true, right? So it's really about shifting perspective. Like if everybody took a moment to stop and think about this from uh, a place, maybe a lower logical place, we would really see that what's happening is not really is it, you know what we want to be happening is actually not actually happening, right? And it's only serving a small percentage of our population. Um, so I think it's we really and yes, right. So healing our past wounds is painful. Like it's just a hard process. And I would argue that this process could feel a lot easier for everybody if our society supported it
Right.
because we wouldn't have the underlying feelings of it's taking me too long. I have to get back to work. I'm not supposed to be in this space, right? So like yes, and again, like yes, it's still going to be painful because feeling hard things and reliving experiences that never should have happened is not going to be pretty, right? And like it's going to be hard. But if we supported it as a society, as a collective, it would feel so much easier to know that it was okay for me to have these feelings. And that's the thing about our feelings is that when we allow them, they go move through us so much quicker. And we have this idea that pushing away our feelings gets rid of them. But they don't go anywhere. They don't,
Mhm.
our feelings don't go anywhere, right? And so um, I think we really need to shift our belief about feelings. We need to come back into a really realistic understanding of what emotions are. Excuse me, and not a capitalistic understanding of what emotions are. We decided emotions should not be a part of our human experience. And so now we're living a life where we're forcing humans to not have them, and then we're shaming them for having them. Um, and we cannot get rid of them, right? And in fact, what we want to do is do the opposite. We want to welcome them. And so it's this paradigm shift. I mean, it's this really big shift in our understanding and our relationship with emotions, from them not being okay to being okay. But just like you're saying, this is a very hard thing to do at an individual level when we're not backed by a collective piece, right? And so when our corporations and when our school systems and when our businesses and our government are not allotting or not supporting it's near impossible, without that support to fully do this process, right? And so we really can't make it an individual. I mean, at the in the grand scheme of things, like we can't make it an individual effort. It has to be a collective effort. And so we have to start to really talk more about emotions. We have to start to really acknowledge them. We have to start to speak up, push back a little bit more in our companies. We have to just start to talk more about our emotions and at an individual level, change your personal perspective so that we can have the ripple effect on the outward.
Right, right. This actually brings me back to when I was training as a doula and childbirth educator. And I did that because when I had Mia, I actually had opted for a natural birth at home in the tub. And through that process, I realized how going to the hospital to have a baby meant that now my pregnancy was looked at as like an illness. And the correlation is such that it makes like we are operating in that way with our mental health too, where all of a sudden, you walk into a hospital and you having a baby means we have to monitor it constantly and we have to have a bunch of interventions, right? Rather than allowing the body to kind of do what it's meant to do. And I'm sure just like in mental health, there's always that, 1 to 3% of outliers that do need some medical assistance. That's why it's there. But for the majority of us, right? Our body was built to have this baby and it's going to do what it needs to do if we just allow it. And so I know you have a similar, like, what's the word? Not simile.
An analogy.
An analogy, thank you, for how emotions are just a natural process that we have to kind of allow.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I like to make the analogy to our bowel movements, right? Our emotional process is very similar to our moving our bowels, right? Like our body has this natural way of excreting waste, physical waste that we put in, and we allow our body to do it, right? And if we didn't, we would have a lot of backup that causes a lot of physical problems, right? And so our emotional space is exactly the same. We have a way to process our emotions, the good and the bad. And so if we allowed all of the emotions to flow through us instead of pushing it away, and building up, right, then we wouldn't have this backup of toxic toxicity really in our body. And it's exactly very similar to using the bathroom, right? It's like we would not allow ourselves to let that back up. And because we know what the consequences are of that. And it's the same exact thing emotionally, that we have to allow our emotions to fully flow through us without repressing them and backing up, because when they do, they cause a lot of problems.
I actually used to use the same analogy in as a doula childbirth educator because it's like somehow society continued to like evolve to like see pregnancy and childbirth as this like very um, like not natural thing. Like it was the norm was to get the epidural, right? And to go through this
Mhm.
process. And the same way that in childbirth, the reasons we weren't progressing through birth, and there were so many interventions and what's it called, cesareans, was because our body was only able to have a baby when it was safe, right? And so anything that our bodies perceived to be dangerous, our body was naturally wired to stop
Mhm.
childbirth in that moment because of, in prehistoric times when we had, when we were prey to a predator and we were about to have a baby, our body would say, okay, not safe, don't have the baby right now, let's go. And
Mhm.
so nowadays, it's unsafe when the lights are on or it's cold or you feel observed. And I think about that now because even as we're talking about processing emotions and giving childbirth, the same is true when you talked about, it needs to feel safe to
Mhm.
feel the emotion.
Mhm.
Um, and I know like there's certain things that you have to do in childbirth to signal safety for birth. And I know you've also talked about, and maybe this is helpful, things that you can do when you're feeling triggered or your nervous system feels dysregulated to try to signal safety in that way.
Yeah, yeah. And the I think the key there is first having the awareness of your own nervous system. So there are some blanket things that we can talk about, but ultimately it's knowing for yourself what feels safe. So figuring that out first, like having that awareness. Because everybody's internal safety system is going to be different. So it's like it's noticing for yourself, what sounds what's it really okay. So we would start too with sensory experiences, because it's the sensory experiences that are activating of the nervous system. So you want to start exploring sensory experiences that make you feel good, right? And so like, what are sounds that help you? What are smells that help you? What are certain touches that help you? Right, certain foods, even certain foods that might help you. So learning yourself is the key first, though, to know what does your body respond well to. And that's really important because there aren't actually blanket. There are some things we can talk about, right? But in knowing that we're so unique and different and our nervous systems can be triggered so easily by sensory experiences, something that might feel healthy for me could actually be triggering for you, right? And so like if squeezing my arm makes me feel safe, you squeezing your arm might activate you because maybe you've had an
Mhm.
experience where that is not safe, right? So you want to really first know yourself. You have to bring your awareness to your internal system to really know what feels good sensory wise for you. And then that's the place to go, is to implement those things. So if you start to feel your heart beating really fast and you can notice like something is rising in me, go, putting your hand on your chest. Touching our body a lot of times is a really great immediate way to build safety in our system. But again, know that about yourself, because if knowing touching yourself is activating, then don't use that as a go-to,
Mhm.
right? But putting our hands on a body part, putting our hands where we feel the tension, and just holding, ultimately just holding that space, that will start to activate safety. um Deep breathing, I mean, the go-to of everyone talks about, right? But it's a go-to because it really works, right? And because it does activate our parasympathetic, and so bringing in deep air and making sure that gets all the way into the belly, and blowing out slower than you breathe in, right? And it's that slow exhale that's going to start to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Cold, so like an ice pack, or any kind of like an ice cube or something, if putting that, or water on your face, putting something like that on your chest, those will start to activate the nervous system as well. Um, Letting your body do what it wants, right? Okay, so like if your body starts to feel like it wants to shake, like shaking, jumping, all these different physical movements and discharges will activate the nervous system.
It's funny you said that because as a kid, I constantly would like shake my leg.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm starting to realize, okay, well, that's probably how I released some of that anxious energy. But I remember it was like this such a not accepted, you
Mm-hmm.
know, thing to do. Like it was like, stop shaking your leg. Don't do that. You're moving the table. Like, what's wrong? What's wrong with you?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like grabbing your leg to not do it anymore, or you talk about like jumping around, and kids that when you're a kid you kind of release that energy that way. I know Mia, when she gets home from school, she had a rough day maybe, and I don't have to say anything to her. She will naturally like be jumping on the couch and
Mm-hmm.
flipping herself over and stuff. And until I started learning about these things, I didn't quite understand like that's how she releases it. But I know when my sister would do that, my parents were like, "Stop jumping on the couch. Don't do that. Like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you sit still?"
Yeah.
And I think about now too how we medicate for things like ADHD because kids can't sit still, or anxiety because we won't let them do what helps them. And what I think happens, and I would love for you to kind of give your perspective on this, is like when we can't naturally release our emotions in these ways that we naturally want to as children, and then we hold it in, is that what eventually then manifests in us developing coping mechanisms that feel like they alleviate these symptoms that don't feel good in our bodies, things like scrolling or procrastinating or video games or TV, Netflix. Like I know for me, anytime like the pressure builds up on something I do for work and it starts to feel overwhelming, it took a long time to even like recognize the
Mm-hmm.
pattern of, oh, now I grab the phone and I'm scrolling. And even some healthy things could become coping mechanisms. Like I think about people that then find themselves like maybe over exercising or overworking or over like people that are going to the yoga studio like all day. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know when it's a coping thing versus an actual healthy release, or how do you know when it's that you're avoiding feeling versus you're processing a feeling, or calming your nervous system versus just trying to avoid the feeling, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So slowing down and asking. Yeah. Yeah. Like if you slow down enough to go in and kind of ask yourself and ask what's going on inside, even just slowing down and saying, like, what's happening, right? Like in allowing that to happen, to really just listening to what the body is saying, and but it's consciously wanting to slow down enough to
Mhm.
build that awareness, right? To answer those questions. Um, so what was the very first thing that you said? Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. Um, yeah.
um about whether things are like coping mechanisms or they're ways of avoiding versus actually
Oh,
um
yes, the health.
emotion.
Yeah, the healthy coping mechanisms, like using them as like too much, or um, using them, overly using them, so that they're not becoming healthy anymore.
Right.
Like,
Like you think, oh, I just work, work is good and I love my work and I do good for good people. But when do you recognize, oh, um, it's really I'm avoiding something,
yeah,
or going to the gym all the time and over I don't know, like I guess the answer to this, I'm like answering my own question, but I feel like sometimes what I hear really in the psychology space is it's when does it start impacting your lifestyle? But I think it's like more than that. Like, well, I guess it's also the impact on your relationships. I don't know.
yeah,
So I guess I'll let you kind of weigh in as it being because when I heard you say too much,
yeah,
that sounded like um judge, what you always say is not to judge it, right?
yeah.
But is there such a thing as doing these healthy coping mechanisms too much?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that you're on the right path of just noticing the signs of, like, am I doing this to avoid something? Like if you like, and you can know that by asking, by really asking yourself, right?
Mhm.
Like if you find yourself pushing things away, like if you find yourself trying to push through emotions, like trying to make them go away without addressing them, like, okay, it's saying to yourself everything's fine or it's no big deal, like minimizing those experiences, or saying something like, well, I already cried about it, it's over, it's no big deal. But while you're saying that, you still feel like your stomach is like in 17 different knots, right? Or the tension in your face is so big, but you're saying out loud it's fine. That doesn't connect, right? And so that's out of alignment. And so it's noticing all the different signs, like really being aware of if the things that you're saying and doing are actually aligning with what you're embodying and acting, right? And so for going to the gym every single day, but I'm still going home and, um, you know, um, I don't know, maybe losing my temper very quickly, right? Or crying very quickly, or having these experiences, like having immediate reactions to things that seemingly or disproportionate, right, to the reaction. Yet I'm doing all these healthy things every single day, then we can see like something is happening, right? It's not congruent. Something is out of alignment here. And so that's when you can start to really notice, like, something must be going on, and maybe I'm using this to avoid what's going on instead. And I think it does come back to how we notice how we deal with conflict and emotion. Like, are we accepting of emotion when it shows up, or are we trying to get rid of it? Do we run away from conflict? Do you notice physically what happens in your body when emotions arise, when conflict arises? And just really starting to notice the physical reactions and the sensations, bringing the awareness again to the body. So it comes back down to slowing down. Um, and like that, I think that's like a great sign. If you notice that you can't slow down, right? If you notice that even me saying slow down, your immediate response is, I can't do that. There's too much to do. You know right there that there's actually something deeper, that there's something in there that you're trying to run from, because slowing down is going to bring up things that feel way too uncomfortable. And your body is like, no way, we're not going to do that. Right. And so just noticing how you respond and react to certain things. Um, if immediately it's defensive, if you can hear yourself every time saying, no, I don't do that, or that's not me, and you're saying
Mm,
that over and over, most likely that is you, right? Most likely you're saying that because you know that it's actually true and your body is trying to push it away.
yeah. Yeah. And you know what? As you were talking, I also thought of something and then I just lost my train of thought. But it was like you were talking about um pushing away emotion. What was I gonna say? Um, my God, I totally lost my thought. But I also wanted to ask,
Yeah.
it'll come back, I'm sure. But I also wanted to ask you, a lot of the people that I coach are high performers, and a lot of the work we do is like they have a big dream and a big vision, and they what feels like an impossible goal, right? Like, and the majority of the work I do with them is around their belief in their vision and their ability to bring it all the way, bring it to fruition. What do you say for a high achiever that is trying to build something that they've never built before or achieve something that they've never achieved before, and they see it as part of their calling and purpose? So it comes from a good place. And yet they seem to like not be able to move through it. They get to the point where they keep burning out before they can get to where they want to be. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So like how can we help them move past that space? Is that what you're
Like
saying?
how do we help them get past the plateau is the
Yeah.
is the thing, right?
Yeah, so okay, if you find that happening quite often, right? If you find it like if that's the pattern, right, of getting to that space, then it's go deeper, right? Okay, so taking the pause and start and saying like what might be a deeper fear that's keeping me from moving forward, right? And don't judge yourself for the responses. So here, like I think a lot of high performers probably come a lot from the mental space and the figuring out space and the problem solving space, right? And so a lot of it's going to come back up in their minds to, okay, how do I solve for this problem? How do I solve for being stuck, right? But it's not we don't have to solve for the emotion or figure that out, right? What you want to do is meet yourself inside and just ask inside, right? Like what's keeping us here. But at the same time, asking your thinking part to not chime in. Right. And so it's asking that thinking part to step aside and then allowing like this is the space really because then the thoughts come in of judging whatever might come up because a lot of times what might come up is really not going to make sense to you. And most of the time it's not going to be something that you're going to consciously correlate as to
Mm,
why this might be keeping you here, right? Because if you could consciously correlate it, you wouldn't be stuck in it,
it's true.
right? So it's like it's allowing whatever comes up to come up without judging it. Maybe it's not true, but maybe it is true. But if right away your thinking part comes in and is like, no, like that doesn't make any sense. That would happen 19 years ago. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. That's right there, right? That's probably the thing that's keeping you stuck then. Right? It's
Right.
because you don't want to go to it. So it's coming in and not judging whatever might come up because the reality is it most likely will not make sense. And that is usually what stops people in going deeper because it's like this, there's no way, and I don't understand that. And so it must not be that, right? And so we kind of ignore it and we don't let ourselves go to that space.
So actually, this makes me think about relationships too, right? Actually, a lot of my clients as high performers have challenges in relationships because they tend to want to solve, right, the problem, and they want to think about it rationally and maybe aren't even aware that their nervous system is being activated in that situation. And so they're like in that space of judging whether or not their response, and this happens to me too, actually,
Mhm.
like whether or not the response is appropriate. And if I deem it not appropriate, then I'm like, okay, um, doesn't make sense. So that's not right. I can't feel that. I can't express that because I don't even know what to do if I were to feel or express that because it's not right. Right?
Yeah, 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 exactly. That judgment that comes in because it doesn't make sense to you, right? But yeah, and yeah, yeah. So it comes back to that like belief about feelings and emotions of some of them being right or wrong or healthy or unhealthy or good or bad, right? It's like it's we have to just do it all without the judgment. There we have to recognize when we come into our subconscious that it's not going to make sense to our conscious. And the thinking part, when you hear the part of you say, no, that can't be it, that doesn't make sense, then you know actually that that part, right, like is holding something that it really needs you to hear because your conscious part is trying not to hear it because it feels unsafe. But it's so then it comes to being aware enough to make the intentional conscious choice in that moment to say, okay, I see a part of me pushing it away and I don't want to push it away. I want to work with that part that wants to push it away to better understand why it wants to push it away. And that's, but we have to have the awareness enough of our parts, right, of our separation there to see that it's not all of me, that there's nothing wrong with me, right, but that this part needs to have is holding information that my conscious part is not accessing right now.
Right. And so what I've found is that the more we start to get curious and accept our own feelings and our own experiences, it becomes easier then as partners to also make it okay for the other person to have their experiences and feelings. But I also find that this is like a really hard thing to do. It's like the more awareness I have is helpful because I can slowly um change the way I respond. Um, and what's helpful about doing this work myself is that, then I can encourage those that are trying to make those changes in their lives to have patience through it because, like you said, no matter how aware I was, it wasn't till I stopped like judging my inability to respond the way that I wanted to once I had the awareness that I started to respond the way that I wanted to more frequently. Um, and so judge like I haven't read the book yet, but I know you recently even recommended a book to me about like judgment. And it's so funny because at least for me, I even judge myself for judging, right?
Yeah.
It's like, talk about why judgment is like the cornerstone of like trauma and our inability to heal, and like show up as who we want to show up as.
Yeah, it's the shame. It's really the shame that's causing the judgment, right? It's like
Mhm.
because we're judging because we're feeling shameful
Mhm.
about something, about ourselves, about something we did, right? So, and the shame builds through having our normal responses or our needs, our emotional needs and our normal responses be not met, right? Or be looked at as not appropriate and not okay, right? And so like as a child, if you were told like stop crying, or it wasn't that bad, or horrific things happened and you were not ever able to tell anybody about them, right? Like um we man, lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, you were talking about how from childhood when when we are shamed for
Yeah,
feeling a
shame.
certain way or
Yeah. Yeah.
expressing a certain way.
Yeah, the shame, right? So the shame, right? Because when we are a kid, and we don't have the support that we need, as a child, it is much safer for our system to internalize, right? And to internalize blame ultimately, right? So if our needs aren't met, or adults haven't supported us in the way that we need to, we internalize that as it being our fault, like something is wrong with us,
Mhm.
that our people can't meet our needs, right? And so then we build this belief system of shame, right? We have these internal belief systems that are built on shame, like I'm not good enough, or it's all my fault, or I'm not lovable, right? Because nobody would come and meet these needs. And so shame, when we are feeling like all of our actions are inherently wrong or bad, we then start to we start to judge everything that we do ultimately, right? Because it's like I don't know what's right or what's not right, because if my body is saying this is right but then I did this and nobody showed up to give that to me, my body is now saying maybe that's wrong. So we don't know what's right or we don't know what's wrong, and so we've built this internalized confusion on how to kind of show up in the world. And if we use others as mirrors, right? And so all of our reflection, like all of our interactions are reflections. And so we judge others because we feel the internal shame of self. So something in us has felt shamed and we see other people doing it. And so nobody showed up for us, right? And so then we shame them through shaming ourselves, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, definitely something that comes up even in coaching sessions. And I know for me, a lot of what brought my childhood stuff to the surface was because I kind of was Mia mirrored it to me, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of like you said, if she was being very emotional or if she was being very like particular about things, in a lot of ways, she's very much like I was as a kid, which is a really highly sensitive
Mm-hmm.
child, right? And so I found that I, even though I wanted to show up for her,
Mm-hmm.
I was responding in like disproportionate ways, and I couldn't understand why I felt like I had no control of it. And then,
Mm-hmm.
through the work we did together, I definitely came to the realization that, okay, she, like little Diana inside was like, no, this is not okay. It wasn't okay for me, and it's not okay for you now. Even though adult Diana wanted to show up as the like nurturing mom,
Mm-hmm.
like little Diana was angry that her needs weren't met when
Yeah.
she needed them to be met. And so maybe give a few examples of what not having your needs met look like. I know that's one, right? Like when I was in distress, I was told I was being too sensitive and I needed to stop crying about it. And it wasn't a big deal the way I made it out to be, right? Like people think that's not trauma. A lot of people, that's just how they
Yeah.
grew up, right? What are some other examples of how that starts, that shame about what feels like true to me, and then how it's reflected back to us in a way that we perceive as I must be wrong, or there
Yeah.
must be something wrong with me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so this is, I mean, it's easy and hard in the same breath because it could happen from so many different things ultimately, because it's an internal perception, right? But in any time, it's going to be any kind of experience where we really didn't feel seen or heard, or where our basic emotional, physical needs or psychological needs weren't met, right? And so even if like in home, let's say your family perspective actually was very healthy and you had two very healthy parents who were emotionally attuned and all of this stuff, and then you go to school, right? And you could have a teacher in kindergarten who is not emotionally attuned and, doesn't allow you to go to the bathroom as often as you need to go to the bathroom and shames you for it, right? Or says, no, you just went 10 minutes ago, right? And so now all of a sudden, like you have a belief system that you go to the bathroom too much and that there's something wrong with you because of it. And even if you go home and your parents support you, and I'm not saying this is every single time, but the possibility is there that even if you have the emotional support and you still have to keep going back to that teacher, that could be enough for your system to now um, build shame around the bathroom, around going to the bathroom, around bowel movements, right? So it could be a lot of little things. Like it's really very personal. If your self, right, felt like the emotional need or the psychological need was not validated, was minimized, was not acceptable, um, was not able to be expressed, that can create in your system enough of a belief about self that it's you, right? And everybody is different, right? We really are so different. And so there's so many factors that come into like why certain people hold beliefs stronger than others or how they get formed, because there's just so many factors that come into play, internal and external factors that come into play with that. But it could be something that we is seemingly so small. I mean, it could be one time you got a bad haircut and you came home and your dad said something like, "You look ridiculously ugly," and you were so excited about that haircut, right? I mean, oh, like you wanted a mohawk, you went out, you got the mohawk, you came home and you were so excited to show dad, and dad was like, "You look ridiculous." Right? That one time of that experience of your stuff being shoved down could be enough for you, honestly, to never go out and get a new haircut without asking everybody you know if it would be okay.
So when I started hearing these things, I started to get really like nervous about all the trauma that I was causing my daughter without knowing it. Right? Like, oh my God. And the second, I started to realize, oh my God, everybody is walking around with trauma,
Yeah.
right? And so if everybody's walking around with trauma and, we're going to give our kids trauma, you know, maybe not even realize it. Um, what do you say about um, like as an adult now, like, because it's almost like you start to feel like, oh, if I have trauma, there's something wrong with me, or if I, give my daughter trauma um, because I got triggered or whatever, there's going to be something wrong with my daughter that I caused, or so. Talk about like how do people then move through this and um because then it starts to feel like almost like I hate to say it that way, but like a death sentence, right? Like now
Mm-hmm.
you're stamped with trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So 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 say something about that and maybe like start to talk about how you work with people that have recognized, oh, you know, I have these experiences that led me here. And what next? And
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, okay. So at the core of that question is coming back to normalizing what it means to be human, is
mm,
coming back to normalizing emotions and redefining emotions as a healthy part of our human experience. Because so many people are holding shame around their emotional experiences, right? It's around these emotional, vulnerable pieces that we still are not accepting in this world, in this society. And so we have to come back to redefining what emotional health really is. And what I mean by that is like getting rid of the notion and idea that emotional health means we're happy and positive all the time. That isn't healthy emotion, right? And so we've got to come back to the idea that life actually is going to contain a lot of really hard moments. Most of our life is going, like most of the, our lives are going to contain just as many hard moments as good moments, right? We're not supposed to have this balance of everything is good and every once in a while something hard and bad happens. But that's this fantasy notion we're all holding on to. And when we
Mhm.
hold that notion, we keep ourselves in suffering because we're trying to get ourselves to do something that's not actually human, right? We're trying to fix our bad days and fix our depression or fix these moments in time that are really meant to be there actually in that moment in time. And if we allowed that as a period of time and a process, it wouldn't cause the deep suffering because we would see it as being valuable actually because it's we're evolving through our emotion, we are growing through our emotion, we're learning, we're healing, all of these things. And so trauma is unfortunately a part of the human experience.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's a great part, and it's like I'm happy that's a part of all of our human experience, but we have to come to the acceptance because if we don't accept it, we will not heal from it. And that's the space that is very hard for a lot of people, is to accept that some of these things in their past could have caused them harm. Um, and that that's okay, right? Like that it's okay. No, it wasn't okay, you got hurt, but it's okay. Like that this, and if we can accept this and realize that everybody is holding, like you said, a lot of stuff, right? It wouldn't, we could all drop it together. Like, let's just all drop it together and know that everybody's having a really hard time at times and that's okay. We just ultimately comes back to really reestablishing this understanding that we have to go through hard times. And what we want to do instead is build the capacity to hold all of this emotion. We want to open space in our body to allow anger, to allow fear, to allow frustration, disappointment, all of these things to live in us because they're here.
Right. Right. Yeah. I love that. That was such a beautiful way to kind of wrap it all together, especially, on a day like today where there's, excitement about recording this podcast with you and there's grief about, not Juan not being here to celebrate his birthday. And there's, so much that comes with the human experience is like allowing all of it and understanding it's not all bad, not all good, not all flat.
Yeah.
I think maybe it was you that said this to me once about, yeah, it was definitely that our emotions are a pendulum, right? And as far to the like the darkness and the
Yeah.
sadness that you experience in life, that's as far as you're going to be able to experience the joy as well. And I thought that was so beautiful because so often the time, especially highly sensitive people, um, we feel like we should not feel so much sadness, right? Like we don't want to. And yet it's what makes us like more fully alive because we're able to hold we have the same kind of capacity to hold the opposite of that, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, I just love to wrap up kind of telling people how they can work with you, how they might find you, what kind of different therapeutic techniques you use in the office in case that, any of this resonated with them and they want to dig deeper and, move through some of that stuckness and address some of their emotions in session with you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that would be great. So right now everything is virtual, so I'm doing all virtual sessions right now. I do have a website that you can find at integratedself.llc.com. And that's also my Instagram handle. And what I do is, okay, I am licensed in New Jersey and Arizona, where that would be mental health treatment, if you will. And outside of that, I do holistic health practices, so I can meet with people across all states. And I practice EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a somatic form of trauma healing that kind of helps us reprocess some of those subconscious beliefs that we were talking about. And then I do practice some internal family systems work. So do a lot of parts work incorporated in that. Energy healing. I'll bring a lot of some quantum energy work and kind of energy shifting into the sessions. And I do that a little bit differently than like a traditional quote unquote like Reiki session. It would be more, typically I use that more as we're working together. If there is something that feels like an energy could be helpful, I'll kind of just bring it into our time and into our session together. So a lot of times that often goes unnoticed as being used, but I use that quite often in my sessions and times together as well. And then somatic practices, and really what that means, and a lot of times people think very big with somatic practices or feel like it means something very like, I don't know, abstract. But really, when we talk about somatic practices, it's just basic building of a different connection with your body. And so we do just a lot of small, really small practices that help to reestablish a different connection to your body and to the emotion that's living in your body.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was great. I think a lot of people are going to get, a lot of new information and even some ways that they can start doing this work. And I can say that as someone that was in therapy for a really long time, it wasn't until we started digging deeper that I started to see real changes happen. And I spent a lot of my life kind of not addressing some really deep core wounds because I thought, I was over that. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the real big shift for me in even, my work, was being able to address the unhealed trauma. And, I still continue to do this work and I think it's so powerful. And um, I think you're changing the world like one person at a time when you do this work. And I'm so grateful to have met you and to have had the opportunity to work with you. And I think so highly of what you do. And I think everybody should kind of have this experience of being able to do this work and move through that healing process. It could be really life-changing. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Courage and Purpose. I hope today's insights inspired you to take bold action and align your life and career with what truly matters to you. If you're ready to dive deeper, I invite you to download my free action indicator assessment, a powerful tool to help you uncover what's holding you back and take the next step towards clarity and confidence. Just visit www.lifeonpurpose.coach/action indicator to get started today. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use a little extra courage on their journey. Until next time, stay true to your purpose, lead with courage, and keep thriving. I'll see you in the next episode.